Good evening, students. Now, already through the process of nutrition, whatever food is being used up by the body, that food is need to reach each and every cell of the body in order to release energy. Okay, now the release of energy takes place through different pathway in different organism. Certain organism may do it in the presence of oxygen, and certain organism may take a pathway wherein they will release the energy in the absence of oxygen. Whenever the respiratory mechanism takes place in the presence of oxygen, we call it as an aerobic process. Okay, and whenever the respiratory mechanism takes place in the absence of oxygen, okay, we call it as anaerobic process. So aerobic respiration means the respiration which takes place in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration means the respiration which takes place in the absence of oxygen. Now in all, there are three different pathways through which this particular mechanism takes place. One is glycolysis. Okay, the second pathway is Krebs cycle, and the third is oxidative phosphorylation, or we simply call it as electron transport system. Okay, now glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport system, all these are the processes that take place in the cell organelles. Okay, glycolysis does not take place in the organelle, it takes place in the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is a structure of the cell, okay, in which all other cell organelles are placed. Okay, of course we need not have to go into detail of these cycles in 10th standard. In 11th standard you have detail of that. So remember only this much: there are three pathways with the help of which the energy release and utilization occurs, and these pathways are glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport system. Electron transport system is also called as oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, now let's see what happens in glycolysis. Okay, glyco means glucose and lysis means splitting. So as the name suggests, glycolysis means splitting up of glucose molecule. So whatever food we eat, through that food the cell receives glucose. Now there is a need to convert this particular glucose into a substance, into a particular compound that is called as pyruvate. And this pyruvate undergoes various mechanisms in the absence of oxygen as well as in the presence of oxygen to form different products which is being utilized by the body, and that is called fate of pyruvate. Okay, so what happens basically, glucose, which is a 6-carbon compound, gets converted into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. Okay, and where does this particular mechanism takes place? It takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, at the same time energy is released. Now this energy is released in the form of ATP molecules. Okay, and that ATP molecule is used up to carry out many endothermic reactions. Okay, so the endothermic reactions which goes on in our body utilizes the ATP molecules, that is adenosine triphosphate. Okay, now from here the pyruvate can either function in the absence of oxygen or in the presence of oxygen, that we call as fate of pyruvate. So a 3-carbon compound which is pyruvate. Okay, this particular mechanism of conversion of pyruvate that takes place in Krebs cycle. Okay, just an information, no need of learning Krebs cycle in detail. Okay, so the glucose, which is a 6-carbon compound, gets converted into pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound. This process takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay, with the release of energy in the form of ATP. Okay, now pyruvate in the presence of oxygen, okay, it results in the synthesis of carbon dioxide with the release of water as well as energy. This particular mechanism takes place in mitochondria of the cell. Okay, mitochondria of the cell is called as the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, so that helps in the release of remaining ATP molecules which is required. Okay, what are ATP basically? The adenosine triphosphate which is released, and that is a form of energy. Okay, pyruvate in the absence of oxygen result in the formation of ethanol with the liberation of carbon dioxide and energy. Ethanol is a 2-carbon compound, and this basically takes place with the help of a process called fermentation. Okay, in bacteria, for example yeast. Okay, now at times we experience cramps in our muscle. That is a situation wherein there is lack of oxygen in the muscle cell. So during this time, what the pyruvate does, the pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound with the release of energy. Okay, and we experience a muscle cramp. Imagine we are sitting in an idle position for hours together and we experience a cramp. That is a particular situation wherein the pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid with the release of energy. Okay, but there is lack of oxygen, and that's why a cramp is experienced. After moving our hands, okay, the hands come back to the normal position, or there is no cramp which lasts for a particular duration of time. That is because energy is also released in this particular process. Okay, so glycolysis means splitting up of glucose. And why glucose gets splitted up? Okay, because a 6-carbon compound cannot be utilized directly by the cell, so there is a need to convert this particular compound into a usable product, which is 3-carbon compound. Okay, and this takes place in the cytoplasm partially, okay, and partially in the mitochondria of the cell. Cytoplasm is not considered as an organelle of the cell. Okay, it is a semi-fluid, I can say, or a semi-liquid substance in which the cell organelles are placed. So which are the cell organelles? We have already studied in 9th standard: mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes. All these are nothing but the cell organelles. Okay, so a 6-carbon compound, that is glucose, gets converted into a 3-carbon compound, that is pyruvate, with the release of energy. Where does this occur? It takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. Now from here the fate of pyruvate is decided. Okay, whether the pyruvate will function in the presence of oxygen or in the absence of oxygen or in lack of oxygen. Okay, lack of oxygen means availability is lesser. Okay, so pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon, in the presence of oxygen, okay, it forms carbon dioxide and water with the release of energy, and this takes place in the mitochondria of the cell. Whereas in the absence of oxygen, it forms ethanol, which is a 2-carbon compound with the release of carbon dioxide and energy. Whereas in the lack of oxygen, okay, the pyruvate gets converted into lactic acid, which is a 3-carbon compound with the release of energy. Okay, this basically takes place in the muscle cell, and the experience is in the form of cramps. Okay, this is experienced when we sit in one particular position for a longer duration of time. Okay, so this shows the splitting up of glucose.